Teacher talking sports, what it does, what it do, how we live. And a couple of days ago, I did my all mostly went undrafted fantasy football team. Today, I'm going to look at the opposite end of the spectrum. I'm going to do my all disappointment fantasy football team for this season, looking at one quarterback, two running backs, two wide receivers, and one tight end who did not perform up to their average draft position. So for this, I did not allow injuries to be the reason why they were included. While all these guys did miss some games when they were on the field, they did not perform up to their expectations. So some guys who were eliminated because they were injured much of the season include Trey Lance, Michael Thomas, Rashad Penny, Elijah Mitchell, and Javonte Williams. So these guys were drafted rather high and were expected to be starters each week, but did not perform that well this season. I'll name their average draft position according to the website Fantasy Pros, which takes websites such as ESPN and Yahoo into consideration, their average draft positions in those websites. And let's get into it. Starting at quarterback, the guy who just couldn't catch a break, has been made fun of probably more than any athlete this year. Russell Wilson, who was on average the 10th quarterback selected in fantasy football leagues. In his 14 games, he averaged 14.5 points in ESPN standard leagues. Very disappointing season for Wilson and the Broncos as a whole. Wilson threw for 340 yards in his first game, but never threw for over 300 any other game this season. He had just 2 games in which he threw multiple touchdown passes, threw 10 interceptions after throwing just 6 the previous season. Barely had more than a 1-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. Disappointing year for the Broncos and Russell Wilson. Running backs, let's start with pretty much the consensus first overall pick in most fantasy leagues, that being Jonathan Taylor of the Colts. Taylor played in 11 games, so he missed 5. In his 11 games, averaged 13.3 points. Definitely not what would be expected for a first overall pick. He had 4 games where he had single-digit totals in ESPN standard leagues and just 2 games with over 20 points. Last season, it was an incredible year. He averaged 106.5 yards rushing per game. This season, just averaged 78.3, so nearly 30 less per game. Averaged 8 less receiving yards per game. Last season, he had 18 rushing touchdowns. This season, just 4. The other running back, and I went back and forth between 2 guys. I ended up going with DeAndre Swift of the Lions. He played in 13 games, so he's missed 3. In his 13 games, 517 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns, 328 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns. In total, averaged 13.5 points per game, which isn't terrible, but he was so inconsistent. I know, I had him in my main fantasy league. You never knew when to start him. He had 4 games with 8.2 points or less. Just was never the bell cow, as Jamal Williams was a touchdown machine and vultured a lot of the TDs away from Swift. Swift had just 3 games in which he totaled double-digit rushing attempts, and his best game may have been the last game of the season, which was most fantasy championships, and if you started him most weeks, decent chance you weren't in that game. He was the 8th running back, taken on average. The 16th wide receiver taken on average was Cortland Sutton of the Denver Broncos. In his 14 games, he missed 2, 61 catches for 796 yards. Not terrible, but just 1 touchdown on the season, which came all the way back in week 4. Started off the season pretty good. 72, 122, and 97 yards in his first 3 games. But over his last 10 games of the season, he averaged just 8.26 points in ESPN standard leagues. He also had 4 games in which he totaled no more than 5.3 points. The 21st receiver taken on average was Allen Robinson II Had a disappointing 2021. Many just blame that on the Bears' poor offense. He was joining a Rams that were the defending Super Bowl champions. Well, in his 10 games, he had just 33 catches for 339 yards and 3 touchdowns, an average of just 8.5 points per game. He had just 2 games in which he had 5 receptions, never had more than 5 receptions in any game. In 6 of his 10 games this season, he had between 2.2 and 8.4 points. And the tight end on my all disappointment team is the fourth overall pick from the 2021 NFL Draft, that being Kyle Pitts, who on average was the third tight end taken. Pitts played in 10 games and totaled just 28 catches for 356 yards and 2 touchdowns on average. In ESPN Standard Leagues, just had 7.6 points per game. He had just 1 game with over 13.7 points, and 7 of his 10 games were single digits. 6 of his 10 games, he scored no more than 4.8 points. While he only reached the end zone once as a rookie, he did have over 1,000 yards. This season, he averaged 1.2 less catches per game than he did as a rookie, and 24.8 less receiving yards than he did as a rookie. So there you have it. The all disappointment team in fantasy football for 2022. Quarterback Russell Wilson, running backs Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift, wide receivers Cortland Sutton and Allen Robinson II, tight end Kyle Pitts. Some other guys who were considered at quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, who had a great week 17, but otherwise didn't perform up to his average draft position, and Matthew Stafford. Running backs, so it was really between DeAndre Swift and Najee Harris for me for the second running back. But Najee Harris has improved, and he has at least 9.9 points in his last 11 games. Others, Cam Akers, David Montgomery, and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Other wide receivers I consider Deontay Johnson, Brandon Cooks, and Darnell Mooney. Other tight ends I consider Darren Waller and Hunter Henry. So let me know in the comments if you agree with this list. Who are some other disappointing players that you drafted in fantasy football that did not perform as well as you expected them to? I hope you did well in your fantasy league. I lost in the semifinals in my main one. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend to tell a friend to tell a friend to subscribe. Like the video, share the video, hit the bell for notifications. I'm out.